Children's literature has come a long way in the past century, hasn't it? In 1900, probably the best that children's literature had to offer was L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz, which, while groundbreaking for children's literature at the time, just doesn't hold up quite as well to modern scrutiny. 100 years later, however, we have the Newbery Award-winning novel by Louis Sachar, Holes, the story of an unlucky boy named Stanley Yelnats and his time at the correctional institution known as Camp Green Lake. The story of race, destiny, and how we treat others was compelling and moving, while also being quirky and funny. A rare balance, but one that the talent of Louis Sachar was easily able to achieve. In 2003, Disney and director Andrew Davis tried their hand at telling the story in their movie of the... Whoa, hold on! What the hell are you wearing? What, this? It's my hat, Matt. I'm the Matt Hatter, and so I always wear a hat. Yeah, but why that hat? Why not this hat? 'Cause you look silly? Maybe. But I thought that since we're reviewing a story about a bunch of kids digging holes in the middle of a hot, dried-up lake bed, it might be a good idea to remind them of the importance of wearing a wide-brimmed hat to protect themselves from the sun. It's the end of October. Still. Fine. Whatever. Continue. Thank you. In 2003, Disney and director Andrew Davis tried their hand at telling the story in their movie of the same name, starring Sigourney Weaver, Jon Voight, and introducing Shia LaBeouf as the often unlucky Stanley. The movie was moderately successful and snagged a few award nominations. And as it happens, Louis Sachar wrote the screenplay to this movie, and so far, the track record of authors that write their own screenplays is pretty good for these reviews. But did Louis Sachar succeed in improving on his already brilliant award-winning story? This is Books vs. Movies review of Holes. Let's begin by looking at our unlucky protagonist, Stanley Yelnats IV. Stanley is always in the wrong place at the wrong time. In this case, he was walking along minding his own business when a pair of shoes fell on him. Like you do. He was then accused of stealing the shoes and was sent to Camp Green Lake, where he was forced to dig holes in a hot, dried-up lake bed every day. Now, Stanley is a nice enough guy, and as a result, he gets bullied a lot, despite the fact that he's easily one of the biggest kids in his class. The fact that he is still such a nice guy, despite the fact that he has this supposed curse on his family, is one of the more redeeming qualities of his character. And we get to see this nice guy quality transform from basically being nice by default because he won't stand up for himself, to being nice because he genuinely wants to do the right thing. The movie Stanley is played by Shia LaBeouf in his first cinematic performance. He definitely has that nice guy quality, and the character is written well enough and develops well throughout the film. And though LaBeouf's acting is a little stilted at times, he does pretty well overall. In fact, he's pretty much identical to his literary counterpart, with one or two exceptions. First of all, Stanley's supposed to be noticeably bigger than anybody else his age. Shia LaBeouf isn't. He's a little bigger than the others, but not substantially so. Plus, we never actually see him being bullied in the movie. He just seems like the type of guy who would be bullied. The book Stanley is not only huge, but also a total wimp. That's two major aspects of the character that the movie really downplayed, and it really adds a lot to it. Like we said, the two characters are almost identical, but those couple of extra qualities in the book tip the character over to that side. But what about the other characters? The kids at Camp Green Lake, the Yelnats family, and all the flashback characters. We've got a lot to get through, so let's get started. We'll start with the bad guys. Mr. Sir, the gruff overseer and basically the number 2 guy at Camp Green Lake, Mr. Pendanski, the counselor for Stanley's tent, and the warden, the one who started Camp Green Lake for her own personal reasons. Honestly, it's hard to choose between these characters. They're written well in both stories, but the actors playing them are very talented. They're played maybe a little more buffoonish in the movie, but they're still plenty intimidating. The kids at Camp Green Lake are also pretty much the same in both, but I think they're a little more clearly defined in the movie. We actually get to see, in several cases, why the kids earned the nicknames that they did, whereas in the book, it's mostly just left a mystery. The relationships between Stanley and the other boys are also played up better in the movie, and they got some decent child actors to play the parts. This story also has a number of backstories to juggle, mostly the story with Kissing Kate Barlow in the original town of Green Lake. While the characters in the book are good, they're written in such a way that we just kind of hear about them rather than actually see them. In the movie, we actually get to see these characters, and again, they got some good actors. In general, I'd say that's pretty much the rule for the other characters. They're written well in both stories, but it's the actors in the movie that really bring them to life. But just how well did these two versions juggle all those backstories? Let's look at composition. There's a lot going on in this story. In addition to Stanley's plotline, you've got the history of Stanley's family, the history of Camp Green Lake, the history of the original town of Green Lake, the history of Kissing Kate Barlow, all of them presented seemingly at random, but in the end, they're all woven together. The movie pretty much follows the book scene for scene, and it balances the different plot lines very well. The plots come in at key moments in the main plot, and in the end, they all come together in a very satisfying way. And actually, if you look at the book, the chapters are written and organized in such a way that it translates really well to movie form. The chapters can be very short if it's a short scene, or long if it's a long scene, and each chapter kind of feels like a new cut in the movie. However, it's clear that this story was originally written as a book, because the transitions in the movie don't always mesh. In the book, it feels very natural to go to a different scene or subject because it's a new chapter. And those chapters are usually short enough that they don't feel like intrusions or interruptions to the main story. Plus, they tend to come at points in the story that would be pretty boring to read about, like Stanley digging his first hole. Now, the movie scenes do that too, but the cuts aren't always as smooth, and you sometimes feel like you've been yanked rudely out of the scene that you were just in. Overall, even though the book was written very movie-like, it was still written as a book, and that's where the composition works best. But how did these stories look? Here's imagery. Louis Sachar, as I've said many times before, has a knack for description that is both exaggerated and yet apt. He somehow manages to capture the things about a person or a situation that we notice but don't really think about, and makes us think about them. The movie does a pretty good job of translating this imagery to screen. I'll admit I'm not wild about the CGI lizards, and some of the flashback transitions are kind of bizarre, but overall it did a pretty good job. They definitely capture the intense heat that these boys are working under, as well as the general desolation of the world they live in. And everything seems to be in a haze a lot of the time, like everything's really dusty and dirty, which, again, makes sense for this story. And the characters, for the most part, seem very caricature-like, which definitely echoes Sachar's writing style. Even some of the flashback effects, cheesy though I find them, give this movie kind of a Sachar-esque feel. So again, it's kind of a tough call, but I'm gonna go with the movie. I definitely think it captured the nature and the spirit of both this story and Sachar's writing. And as always, it all comes down to which version told the better overall story. This one's really hard to choose because both book and movie are practically identical. Sachar wrote both the book and the screenplay for the movie, and in this case, the book was written so much like a movie anyway that it was pretty easy to transpose. Pretty much everything that happened in the book happened in the movie, in the same way that it happened in the book. There are a few minor differences, though. The curse on Camp Green Lake is explained a little more in the book, while it's more implied in the movie. But then the curse on the Yelnats family is explained more in the movie. Maybe a little too much. The identity of Kissing Kate Barlow comes as more of a surprise in the book, simply because you can't actually see her, but the movie did a decent job of making the two personas look different. The boys at Camp Green Lake are a little harsher and more realistic in the book, but they're more likable in the movie. I mean, each story has equal pros and cons. How do you pick between two stories that are identical except for a few minor differences? It's practically a tie. But wait a minute, hang on. Let's look at this logically. Holes the book won a Newbery Award. In 2000, a committee came together and said that this was the finest piece of children's literature that they had seen that year. And it also happens to be on my favorites list. Now, the movie is good, and I liked it, but it doesn't really stand out in the cinematic world, and it's not on my favorites list. So clearly, the book is better. But why? Is it really those minor differences? Do they really add up that much? Well, they kinda do. The thing about this movie is that it is definitely geared towards kids. While the book is marketed to kids, I've also seen it marketed to young adults, and to be honest, pretty much anyone of any age could read and enjoy this story. It fits together well and has a universal message. The movie does too, but not quite as effectively, and there are a couple of scenes that just scream, "This is a kids' movie!" Also, when two stories are so identical that there's practically nothing of note to compare between them, I'm gonna tend to lean on the side of the original version. This story was originally intended for text, not for screen, and that is where it works. Sachar might have actually done better to make a few more changes and write this more as a movie rather than a book turned into a movie. Also, when the book came out, It was an original idea. When the movie came out, it wasn't anymore, and there wasn't enough to distinguish it from the brilliance of the original version. So when we remember this story, it's the book that we remember, not the movie. And to be honest, I actually saw the movie before I read the book. And I still liked the book better. That's where this story belongs, as a book. The movie is definitely a good one, but it's the book story that really stands out. There, the review's over. Now will you take that ridiculous hat off?
How can you not like this hat? Come on.
You know, I thought that hats were supposed to make you more sensible. If you were more sensible, you wouldn't be wearing that hat.
Ah, but this hat also has a Catch-22 eliminator.
You're impossible. See you next time, folks.